Shortly after God's prophet Samuel anointed David as king of Israel after God rejected Saul for his disobedience, Israel was confronted by a great challenge one never experienced before. The Philistine army, the long-sworn enemy of God's people, gathered together to battle Israel. Saul and the men of Israel too were gathered together, ready for battle. The Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side with a valley between them. However, this was not a usual battle, as the Philistine army was at a significant advantage over the Israelites. They had a giant warrior named Goliath, who was 6 cubits or 9 feet 9 inches tall. His armory was made of pure brass and heavy metals, heavy enough to break any shield and crush an enemy's bones into pieces. He had a voice that boomed like a thunderstorm and a temper to match. Goliath stood before the Philistines' army with a thundering voice, challenging the Israel army to present their finest warrior to face him in a duel. He said, "Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." 1 Samuel 17:8-9. But the king of Israel, Saul, and his army quivered in fear as Goliath's voice rumbled through the valley. No one was fit and skilled enough to face a warrior giant. King Saul has lost God's spirit that would have empowered him to fight and win. He had lost his position as the king, although he was still sitting on the throne. Now, it was at the height of the fear and tension in the camp of Israel's army that David, a young shepherd boy, visited. His father, Jesse, had sent him with some food items to take to his brothers Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah, who were soldiers enlisted to fight in the battle against the Philistines. David was the youngest of Jesse's sons. The Bible describes him as ruddy, with bright eyes and good-looking, 1 Samuel 16:12. Unlike his older brothers, David spent much of his time tendering his father's flock in the wilderness. He had never been to a battle. When David was in the camp, Goliath roared his threats again to destroy Israel's army and take them as slaves. David saw how the soldiers trembled in dreadful fear. However, David heard something that piqued his interest. The soldiers said a mouth-watering reward awaited anyone who would defeat Goliath. They said, "And it shall be that the man who kills him the king will enrich with great riches, will give him his daughter and give his father's house exemption from taxes in Israel." 1 Samuel 17:25. When David's oldest brother, Eliab, saw him talking to the soldiers about Goliath and the king's reward, he became angry. He scolded him, reminding him he did not belong on the battlefield but among the sheep. However, David had already made up his mind to confront Goliath. No one could stop him, not even his brother's harsh remarks. So David walked right up to King Saul and said, "Let no man's heart fail because of him, Goliath. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." 1 Samuel 17:32. But Saul declined. He said he could not send a young, inexperienced boy into the battlefield to face a giant warrior. However, David insisted, stating the battles the Lord had helped him win in the wilderness while tendering his father's sheep. David presented his battle record against a lion and a bear that tried to snatch his sheep. He believed the same God that delivered him from these wild beasts would deliver him from Goliath. Convinced by David's words, King Saul, who had no other option or plan to defeat Goliath, had to allow the young boy to go into battle. But Saul wouldn't let him go without armor that could absorb the blow, thrust and cut from Goliath's heavy sword, spear, and javelin. Saul put a bronze helmet on David's head and clothed him with a coat of mail. David fastened Saul's sword to his armor but couldn't walk because he was not used to weapons like that. Now, King Saul looked at David and saw a little fella who couldn't even carry a shield properly, let alone face a giant. But David wasn't looking for fancy armor or swords. He said to Saul, "I cannot walk with these, for I have not tested them." So David took them off. 1 Samuel 17:39. David grabbed his shepherd's staff and a sling, chose 5 smooth stones, and marched toward Goliath. Now, Goliath, when he saw David coming, laughed like thunder. He said in disgust, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." 1 Samuel 17:43-44. But David quickly replied to Goliath, telling him his weapon was not physical, but spiritual. He said while Goliath came to fight him with a sword, spear, and javelin, he had come in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel. David trusted God to help him conquer Goliath. Without mincing words, he boldly declared to Goliath that God would deliver him into his hands. He would kill him and cut off his head. And everyone would know that there is a God in Israel. With that, David twirled his sling and let one of the stones fly, hitting Goliath right on his forehead. The giant staggered and fell, and the earth shook. David ran toward him, drew Goliath's sword from its sheath, and cut off his head with it. It was a flawless victory. The Philistines couldn't believe their eyes, while the Israelites cheered like thunderstorms. The Philistines fled when they saw that their champion was dead. Then Israel's army arose, pursued them, struck them, and plundered their tents. David returned to Jerusalem with Goliath's head and delivered it to King Saul. Marveled by David's display of courage and uncommon battle skills, Saul took David and did not allow him to return to his father's house. David became Saul's personal protection detail, following him everywhere he went. Saul promoted David from a shepherd boy to a military commander. David became head over all the men of war, including his brothers. However, David's battle against Goliath was only the tip of the iceberg. Greater battle awaited David as the days of him becoming king approached. At first, King Saul was oblivious to the fact that David had been appointed by God to take over the throne from him. At first, Saul saw David as a young boy with so much potential. However, everything changed when David's victory over Goliath made David a hero in the eyes of the Israelites. One time, David was returning from one of his successful military expeditions against the Philistines, that the women composed and sang a song that provoked anger and hate in Saul's heart against David. They sang, "Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s, 1 Samuel 18:7. As David's popularity grew, Saul's jealousy and insecurity increased. The prophet Samuel had previously informed him that his kingdom would be taken away from him, and he saw David as a potential rival to his throne. Despite David's loyalty and service to Saul as a skilled musician and warrior, Saul's attitude toward David began to change. The next day, while David played the harp for Saul, the king hurled his spear at David, attempting to pin him to the wall. David narrowly escaped and fled from Saul's presence. One of the king's rewards to whoever killed Goliath was that the king would give him his daughter's hand in marriage. However, Saul gave another man his daughter as if to provoke David. However, David remained calm, obedient, and loyal to the king. Saul's second daughter, Michal, fell in love with David, and he decided to give her to David as his wife. However, Saul devised a plan he thought would lead to David's death. He asked David to bring him the foreskins of 100 Philistine warriors as his daughters instead of a dowry. Still, David succeeded because God was with him, and Saul gave him Michal, his daughter, as a wife. Again, Saul sent his soldiers to David's house to capture and kill him, but Michal helped David escape through a window, and he fled to safety. She made a human-like image, covered it with goat's hair, laid it on the bed, and covered it with clothes. So when Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, "He is sick." Saul was disappointed that his daughter deceived him, but she lied to cover up for her husband, saying he attempted to kill her, so she let him escape. Saul pursued David relentlessly, leading him to hide in various locations and form alliances with local leaders. On several occasions, David had the opportunity to kill Saul but chose not to, as he respected Saul's position as the anointed king of Israel. Eventually, the rivalry between Saul and David came to an end. Saul and his son Jonathan were killed in a battle against the Philistines. After Saul's death, David mourned the loss of Saul and Jonathan and became the undisputed king of Israel. That's how David, a shepherd boy with a sling and a heart full of courage, defeated Goliath, the mighty giant, escaped from the claws of his king, and became Israel's greatest king,